No one in town thought twice about the old woman walking down Maplewood Street. She was just another face among the Saturday crowd, another elderly neighbor hauling groceries home. But Shadow, the German Shepherd K9 with eyes like polished amber, froze in his tracks the second he saw her. His hackles rose, his muscles stiffened, and then came that deep, rumbling growl that every officer learns to trust. It wasn't a warning. It was a signal. And if Ryan Cooper, his handler, had ignored it, the 30 faces hidden inside that canvas bag might have stayed buried in silence forever. The patrol had been nothing out of the ordinary until then. A bright fall afternoon. Maple leaves swirling in little golden spirals down Main Street. Kids playing tag near the library steps. Ryan sipping lukewarm coffee from a styrofoam cup, thinking about whether he'd have leftover chili for dinner or finally order Chinese takeout, like his daughter kept nagging him to. Shadow trotted beside him, tongue lolling, tail wagging lazily. The dog was off duty in a sense. No alerts, no suspects, just a calm walk to the neighborhood they both knew too well. Ryan was about to toss his empty cup when Shadow stopped dead in front of Miller's Hardware. The change was instant. The dog's easygoing rhythm snapped into laser focus. His ears locked forward, nose twitching, body crouched like a bowstring drawn tight. Shadow. Ryan frowned, following the dog's stare. What is it, boy? That's when he saw her. The woman was small, almost frail, her back hunched beneath a weathered cardigan. Her white hair stuck out in wild strands from under a knitted hat. She clutched a canvas shoulder bag so tightly to her chest it looked like she was shielding a newborn. Her steps were quick for her age, nervous even. Ryan wouldn't have noticed anything odd. Plenty of folks carried bags heavier than they looked. If it weren't for Shadow, the dog's growl grew louder, sharper, enough that pedestrians started to glance over. Easy, Ryan murmured, tightening the leash. But Shadow wasn't hearing it. His paws dragged forward, claws scratching the sidewalk as if every instinct screamed that the woman's bag wasn't what it seemed. The old woman noticed. Her eyes, pale, sharp, much too alert, flashed toward the dog. She clutched her bag tighter and quickened her pace. That was the first moment Ryan felt the hair rise on his own arms. People in small towns like Ravenwood, Oregon know each other, or at least know of each other. Ryan recognized the woman instantly. Margaret Holloway. Lived 3 streets over. Quiet. Reclusive. A widow who'd been around longer than half the families who now filled the cul-de-sacs with barbecues and 4th of July fireworks. Nothing criminal about her. Nothing to suggest danger. And yet, Shadow wouldn't let her out of his sight. Ma'am, Ryan called, keeping his tone polite but firm. You all right carrying that? Need a hand? Margaret didn't slow down, didn't even acknowledge him. She just kept moving, muttering under her breath words he couldn't catch. Except for one. Never know. Ryan's pulse ticked up a notch. Shadow lunged forward, barking once, sharp and commanding. The sound bounced off the brick storefronts, startling a teenager on a skateboard and sending a woman spilling her iced latte. People turned. Margaret flinched, and for a split second, the bag slipped. Ryan's eyes caught it. A glimpse of glossy paper, the worn corner of a photograph sticking out between the canvas folds. Margaret shoved it back inside, so fast you'd think it burned her fingers. Shadow barked again, a thunderous sound that made Ryan grip the leash with both hands. Ma'am, he said more firmly now, is there something you'd like to tell me about that bag? Her head whipped toward him, her face, lined and weary, twisted into something between fear and fury. Leave us alone, she snapped, and before he could stop her, she pushed past, hobbling fast toward her block. Ryan stood frozen for a moment, Shadow winding it aside, tugging toward her retreating figure. The sensible part of him said it was nothing. An old woman, a bag, a photo, maybe of her grandkids. But the part of him that had trusted Shadow in meth houses, in alleyway pursuits, in midnight searches to the woods for missing teens, that part screamed otherwise. And Shadow was rarely wrong. That night, Ryan couldn't shake it. The way her hands shook, the weight of the bag, the muttered words. After tucking his daughter into bed, he sat at the kitchen table with a beer and opened his laptop, Margaret Holloway, Ravenwood, Oregon. Not much came up. A death notice for her husband 20 years ago. Some archived articles from a local church bulletin. She'd volunteered at the St. Mary's Orphanage back in the late 70s. The orphanage had shut down in '82. Funding issues, records lost. Ryan vaguely remembered hearing about an academy lectures on cold cases, but nothing specific stuck. He was about to close the laptop when Shadow padded into the kitchen, nails clicking softly on the linoleum. The dog sat square in front of him, eyes fixed on a window that faced Margaret Street. A low whine slipped from Shadow's throat. Ryan followed his gaze into the dark and felt that same unease crawl back into his chest. The next morning, the town woke to the same calm routine. Coffee at the diner, kids waiting for the bus, people sweeping leaves off their porches. Ryan parked his cruiser at the edge of Maplewood, sipping coffee, trying to convince himself yesterday had been nothing. Shadow didn't buy it. The moment the dog's paws hit the sidewalk, his nose lifted, tail stiff, eyes fixed down the block. Margaret was there again, bag slung over her shoulder. She looked smaller in the daylight, but her grip on the strap was just as fierce. "All right, boy," Ryan muttered. "Let's see what you've got." He crossed the street, keeping pace behind her. Shadow pulled harder with each step. Ryan's chest tightened. Something about the way of that bag, the way it seemed to drag Margaret sideways. Wasn't right. Morning, Mrs. Holloway. He tried again, lighter this time. No response. She just walked faster. Shadow barked once, loud, startling a couple in jogging gear. Margaret stumbled. The bag slipped, thudding against the curb. And that's when it happened. The flap opened. Photos spilled out like fallen leaves, scattering across the sidewalk. Ryan's heart stopped. Not one photo. Dozens, maybe 30, faces of children, some in school portraits, some in candid snapshots. Boys and girls of different ages, different backgrounds, each one smiling, frozen in time. Margaret scrambled, clawing at the photos, whispering frantically. "They never found them, but I did." For a long moment, the street was silent except for her muttering and the frantic scrape of her hands gathering the photographs. Shadow stood rigid, every muscle taut, barking once more like a verdict delivered. Ryan knelt, picking up one photo that had fluttered to his boot. A boy, maybe 8, blonde hair, a baseball cap crooked on his head. On the back, in faded ink, a single name. Ryan recognized it. He'd seen it once before, on a cold case flyer buried in the station archives. He looked up slowly. Margaret was staring at him, eyes wide and glassy with tears. Her lips trembled as she whispered. They didn't listen. No one listened, but they're still here. Ryan's chest felt hollow. His hand tightened on the photo. Shadow's growl vibrated like a warning bell at the edge of something much darker. And in that instant, Ryan knew this wasn't just an old woman's eccentric secret. It was the beginning of something much, much bigger. Sparkles of stories like this pull you in. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss what happens next. Sparkles. Ryan stood, the photos still in his hand, the old woman clutching the rest of them to her chest. Pedestrians had stopped, whispering, confused by the scene. But Ryan wasn't confused anymore. Not after seeing the name. Shadow barked one last time, eyes locked not on the woman, but on the dark street stretching beyond her, as if warning that the truth wasn't in the bag alone. It was waiting somewhere else, hidden in plain sight, and Ryan had no idea yet how deep it went. The stack of photographs wouldn't leave Ryan Cooper's mind. Even after Margaret Holloway shuffled away, muttering to herself, clutching her canvas bag like a lifeline, Ryan couldn't shake the image of those children's faces scattered across the sidewalk. Shadow hadn't moved until Margaret disappeared around the corner. The dog sat planted, ears rigid, gaze locked on the direction she'd gone. When Ryan finally tugged the leash, Shadow resisted, his deep growl rolling like distant thunder. That was the thing about working with AK-9. People could lie, people could hide, but the dog, he knew. Back at the station, the chatter was routine. Officers trading football predictions, dispatch radios buzzing, someone dropping donuts on the break room table. But Ryan moved through it like a ghost, his hand still gripping the single photograph he'd slipped into his pocket before Margaret scooped up the rest. The picture was of that blonde boy in the baseball cap. 8 years old, grin full of baby teeth. On the back, one word in faded pen, Eddie. Ryan sat at his desk, pulled up the database, and typed the name. It didn't take long. Edward, Eddie Franklin, missing since 1989. Last seen, leaving a Little League game in Portland. Case cold for over 3 decades. Ryan's stomach tightened. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as Shadow lay at his feet, head resting on his paws but eyes open, alert. One photo could be brushed off. A yard sale find, an old newspaper clipping, a grandparent's keepsake. But 30? And all stuffed into one bag, carried by a woman muttering about no one listening? That was no coincidence. Cooper, you look like you saw a ghost. Ryan blinked. Officer Dave Milligan leaned against his cubicle wall, smirking. He was 10 years younger, cocky, the kind of guy who still thought every case ended like an episode of Law and Order. Something like that, Ryan muttered. Dave nodded toward Shadow. Your mutt looks wired. What happened on patrol? Ryan hesitated. He could play it off, keep it light, but then he thought of Margaret's shaking hands, her whispered words. They never found them, but I did. He slid the photograph across the desk. Dave picked it up, frowning. Kid. Missing kid. 1989, cold case. Dave's eyebrows shot up. Where the hell did you get this? Ryan didn't answer right away. He just glanced down at Shadow, whose ears twitched like he was listening to every word. That night, Ryan drove back through Margaret's neighborhood. It wasn't on his patrol route, but he couldn't ignore the gnawing in his gut. The houses were older, the sidewalks cracked, the streetlights buzzing with faint yellow halos. He parked a block away and let Shadow lead. The dog's nose was to the ground immediately, tail rigid, body tense. They stopped outside Margaret's house. The porch light was off, curtains drawn. The place looked swallowed by shadows, the kind of home kids dare each other to run up to on Halloween. Shadow whined low in his throat, pulling toward the door. Ryan's hand brushed above his flashlight, torn between duty and the unease prickling his skin. He couldn't just walk up without cause. Margaret hadn't broken a law. Not yet. But Shadow didn't care about warrants or legal procedures. His instincts screamed something was wrong, and Ryan had spent too many years learning those instincts rarely failed. The next morning, Ryan requested Margaret's file from town records. It wasn't much. Born in Ravenwood. Married in her 20s. Widow by 50. Volunteered at St. Mary's Orphanage until it shut down. No arrests, no charges. Not even a parking ticket. But buried in an old police log from 1982, Ryan found a note. St. Mary's Orphanage closure. Allegations of neglect. Rumors of missing children. No formal charges filed. Records sealed. Ryan stared at the words until they blurred. Shadow nudged his leg, tail thumping once against the floor, like urging him forward. Yeah, Ryan muttered, scratching behind the dog's ear. I know. We're not done. That afternoon, Ryan spotted Margaret again. She was at the corner of Willow and Pine, waiting at the crosswalk, her canvas bag hanging heavy at her side. She looked smaller in daylight, fragile even, but the way she clutched that strap was iron strong. Shadow stiffened the second he saw her. His growl rumbled deep. Ryan approached carefully. Mrs. Holloway. She flinched, turning sharply. Her eyes, cloudy but fierce, met his. You don't need to follow me, she said. Her voice shook, but her grip on the bag didn't. I'm not following you, Ryan replied, keeping his tone level. But I did see what fell yesterday. Her knuckles whitened on the strap. They're not yours. They're not yours either, Ryan countered. Those kids, they were reported missing. Their families. Her voice cracked into a whisper. Their families stopped looking. The police stopped looking. I never did. Ryan's breath caught. Shadow barked once, sharp enough to turn heads from across the street. Margaret's whole body jolted, and for the first time, fear flashed across her face. She turned abruptly, shuffling faster than Ryan thought her legs capable. Shadow lunged forward, but Ryan held him back. He couldn't make a scene in the middle of Willow Street. Not yet. But Margaret's words rattled in his head long after she disappeared again. I never stopped looking. That night, Ryan spread the cold case files across his kitchen table. Missing kids spanning decades. Flyers yellowed with age. Names long forgotten by the town. Shadow paced the length of the room, restless. Every time Ryan paused over a file, the dog nosed his hand, as if pushing him toward the truth faster than he could handle. Ryan set Eddie Franklin's photo down, then placed another from the files beside it. A girl this time. Brown hair, freckled cheeks. Susan Carter. Missing 1991. He pulled the photograph of Eddie from his pocket again. Same faded handwriting on the back. The same kind of ink. Margaret hadn't just stumbled across these. Someone had written those names carefully, deliberately. The question burned. Was she collecting them? Or was she keeping them? The following morning, Ryan made a decision. He parked across from Margaret's house again, Shadow in the passenger seat. The dog's ears pricked the moment the old woman stepped onto her porch. Her bag was there, always there, slung over her thin shoulder. Ryan stepped out. Mrs. Holloway, please, I just want to understand. Her gaze softened for the briefest moment, and Ryan swore he saw sorrow swimming in her eyes. Then her lips tightened. You wouldn't believe me, she said. Try me. She hesitated. Shadow took a step closer, tail stiff, head low, as if urging her on. Margaret whispered, They're still here. Before Ryan could ask what she meant, she turned and disappeared into the house, door slamming shut behind her. Ryan stood frozen on the sidewalk, Shadow's growl humming beside him. Still here. The words clung to him all the way back to the station, all the way through paperwork, all the way into the restless dark of that night. And when Shadow barked suddenly at the window, Ryan jolted, heart hammering, because across the street, in the pale glow of the street lamp, Margaret Holloway was standing on her porch, bag clutched tight, staring directly at his house. Ryan Cooper hadn't slept more than an hour. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, Margaret Holloway, standing on her porch across the street, staring through the night like she was waiting for something. Her silhouette under the buzzing street lamp, the bag clutched tight, her face unreadable. Shadow hadn't stopped pacing either. The German shepherd alternated between the front door and the window, growling low, his amber eyes locked on Margaret's house. It wasn't normal. None of it was. By morning, Ryan felt the weight of exhaustion press against his skull, but the unease pressed harder. He tugged on his boots, grabbed his badge, and clipped Shadow's leash. All right, boy, he muttered. We're not letting this go. The dog barked once, sharp and eager, ready for the hunt. At the station, Ryan carried the unease with him like a shadow. He pulled Margaret's file back onto his desk, flipping to the meager records again. Married, widow, volunteer work, no criminal history. And yet, 30 children's photographs stuffed into her bag. He thought of her words, whispered like a prayer. They're still here. The phrase crawled under his skin. Cooper. Ryan looked up to see Lieutenant Harris looming over his desk. The man was nearing retirement, his hair mostly gray, his patience thinner than ever. You look like hell, Harris said. Thanks, Ryan muttered. What's going on? Ryan hesitated, then slid the photograph across the desk. Eddie Franklin. Blonde hair, baseball cap, the boy frozen in time. Harris squinted. Where'd you get this? Ryan hesitated. If he admitted the truth, Harris would shut it down. Margaret hadn't committed a crime. They had no grounds to search her, no cause to pursue. The rules were clear. Let's just say Shadow found it, Ryan said carefully. Harris sighed. You've been chasing ghosts again, Cooper. Let it go. But Shadow, lying under the desk, lifted his head and growled softly, as if disagreeing. That afternoon, Ryan drove past Margaret Street again. He wasn't assigned there, but his gut pulled him back like a magnet. Shadow's nose pressed against the cruiser window, fogging the glass with his breath. Margaret was outside, not on the porch this time, but walking slowly toward the woods at the edge of town. Her canvas bag bounced against her side with each step. Ryan's grip on the steering wheel tightened. Let's see where she's going, boy. He parked 2 blocks down and followed on foot, Shadow tugging ahead, leash taut. The woods were old, pines stretching tall, their needles carpeting the ground in silence. Trails wound like veins, some leading to abandoned hunting cabins, others to nowhere. Kids used to play here, back when Ryan was a boy. They dared each other to camp overnight, to tell ghost stories around fires until someone ran screaming. Shadow's ears twitched, nose working furiously. His bark cut through the quiet once before Ryan hushed him. Up ahead, Margaret moved steadily, despite her frailty. She stopped at a clearing, set the bag down on a rotting stump, and knelt. Ryan and Shadow froze behind a tree, watching. Margaret pulled something out of the bag, an old photograph. She placed it gently on the stump, smoothing it with shaking hands. Then another, and another. Soon the surface was covered with children's faces, their smiles eerily bright in the dim forest light. Her lips moved, a whisper, a chant too low for Ryan to hear. Shadow growled. Margaret's head shot up. Her pale eyes swept the clearing, scanning the trees. Ryan held his breath, gripping Shadow's collar. For a moment, her gaze seemed to lock directly on them. Then she gathered the photos, shoved them back into the bag, and shuffled deeper into the woods. Ryan waited until she was gone before stepping into the clearing. Shadow bounded forward, nose pressed to the stump, sniffing furiously. Ryan crouched. A single photograph remained, caught under the edge of bark. He pulled it free. A girl, maybe 10, hair in braids, freckles dotting her cheeks. On the back, Susan Carter. Missing 1991. Ryan's chest tightened. Shadow whined, pawing at the stump, then turning toward the direction Margaret had vanished. His bark echoed once, carrying to the trees like a warning. That night, Ryan spread the photographs he had. Eddie and Susan, across his kitchen table. 2 faces among 30. 2 names among 30. His daughter wandered in, rubbing her eyes. "Dad, why are you up?" Ryan quickly flipped the photos over. "Work stuff, sweetheart. Go back to bed." She nodded sleepily and padded down the hall. Shadow sat at Ryan's side, ears pricked, gaze never leaving the photos. Ryan rubbed his temples. "What are we walking into, boy?" The following day, Ryan made a choice. If Harris wouldn't listen, he'd dig on his own. He visited the library, the dusty archives that smelled of paper and time. Hours passed as he flipped through microfilm, scrolling through headlines from the early 80s. And there it was. St. Mary's Orphanage closes amid allegations. The article was vague. Mentions of administrative issues. Hints at unexplained absences. But no charges. No details. Just silence. Shadow lay at Ryan's feet, restless, paw tapping the floor. Ryan leaned closer to the screen. A quote from Margaret herself. She'd been interviewed at the time. "They'll never be forgotten. Not while I'm here." Ryan's blood ran cold. That evening, Ryan parked once again near Margaret's house. He couldn't stop himself. The bag, the photographs, the whispers in the woods. Shadow sat upright in the passenger seat, ears stiff. The porch light flickered on. Margaret stepped out, her bag slung over her shoulder. But this time, she wasn't alone. A man stood beside her, tall, broad-shouldered, face obscured by the shadow of his hood. He placed a hand on her shoulder, whispered something, and she nodded. Ryan's heart hammered. Shadow growled low, teeth bared. The man looked up, and though the distance made it impossible, Ryan swore those eyes locked onto his cruiser. The porch light went out. The street went dark. Ryan sat frozen, Shadow's growl vibrating through the silence. The bag wasn't the only secret Margaret Holloway carried. And now, someone else knew Ryan was watching. Ryan Cooper couldn't stop seeing the man. That shadow-faced figure on Margaret Holloway's porch, his hand resting on her shoulder like some unspoken pact. It replayed in his mind all night. The tilt of the man's hood, the way he seemed to look straight through the darkness, straight into Ryan's cruiser. By morning, Ryan had worked himself into a restless haze. The clock on the kitchen wall ticked too loud, his coffee tasted like ash, and Shadow hadn't settled once. The German shepherd paced the living room, nose twitching, ears flicking at every sound outside. "You feel it too, huh, boy?" Ryan muttered, rubbing his temples. "We're in deeper than we thought." Shadow stopped, turned, and stared at him with those piercing amber eyes. Then the dog barked once, sharp like an answer. At the station, Ryan kept the details close. He didn't tell Lieutenant Harris about the man. Didn't mention the clearing in the woods or the photographs laid out like a shrine. He knew Harris would dismiss it, chalk it up to paranoia or obsession. But Ryan had been a cop too long to mistake instinct for fantasy, and Shadow's instincts were screaming louder than ever. So he did what every cop in a small town eventually does when the brass won't listen. He went around them. That afternoon, Ryan drove back toward the woods. The October sky hung heavy, gray clouds pressing low, the air sharp with the smell of pine and damp leaves. He parked the cruiser on a back road, far from Margaret Street, and clipped Shadow's leash. "Find her, boy." Shadow's nose dropped to the earth immediately, tail rigid, his body a coiled spring of purpose. He pulled hard, weaving off the dirt road and into the trees. The forest swallowed him in silence, broken only by the crunch of needles underfoot and the distant call of a crow. Ryan followed close, heart pounding, one hand on his flashlight though daylight still filtered through the branches. Shadow stopped suddenly, ears forward, nose to the ground. He barked once, pawing a patch of earth near a half-collapsed fence post. Ryan knelt, brushing aside leaves. Something metal glinted back at him. He pulled it free. An old locket, tarnished, the chain broken. He flipped it open, breath catching. Inside was a photograph of a child, a girl with pigtails, smiling, gap-toothed. On the back of the photo, in the same faded handwriting as the others, Emily, 1978. Ryan's pulse thundered. Shadow barked again, louder this time, circling the spot, digging furiously. Ryan joined him, clawing away at the earth with his hands. Soon more objects surfaced. A child's shoe, the rusted frame of a bicycle bell, a button torn from faded fabric. Each piece was small, almost mundane, but together they formed a mosaic of something far darker. Ryan sat back on his heels, dirt under his nails, staring at the pile of relics. "God Almighty," he whispered. Shadow whined, pawing the ground again, nose still searching as if more secrets lay buried deeper. Ryan swallowed hard. "We need to bag this. All of it." But as he reached for his radio, a sound broke the silence. Branches snapping, slow, deliberate, somewhere deeper in the pines. Shadow stiffened, his growl low and deadly. Ryan froze, eyes sweeping the tree line. "Hello?" he called, though his gut told him he didn't want an answer. The woods stayed silent. That night, Ryan laid the locket and the other artifacts on his kitchen table beside Eddie Franklin's and Susan Carter's photographs. He cleaned the dirt away, each item now glinting under the lamp like pieces of a broken puzzle. Shadow sat at his side, head high, gaze fixed. Ryan's daughter padded into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Dad, why are you always up late now?" Ryan forced a smile, sliding a folder over the evidence. "Just work, sweetheart. Go on back to bed." She yawned and shuffled away. Ryan exhaled. His smile faded. He looked back down at the locket, at Emily's smiling face. "Still here," he muttered, repeating Margaret's words. Shadow whined softly, pressing his nose to the table edge, like urging him not to ignore it. The following day, Ryan went back to the archives. He scrolled to the microfilm again, eyes burning, mind numb from the repetition, until one article made him stop cold. Local girl Emily Patterson missing, 1978. The photograph in the article matched the one in the locket exactly. Ryan's chest tightened. He flipped through more reels. Headlines emerged like whispers from the past. Child vanishes near St. Mary's. Police investigate orphanage staff. Case closed without charges. Dozens of missing children scattered across decades. Each one a dead end. Each one quietly forgotten, except by Margaret. That evening, Ryan sat in his cruiser outside her house. He told himself he wasn't going to approach her. Just watch. Just gather. Shadow sat in the passenger seat, ears pricked, eyes locked on the porch. The door creaked open. Margaret stepped out, bag slung over her shoulder. She looked smaller than ever, swallowed by her oversized cardigan, but her pace was purposeful, and she wasn't alone again. The hooded man appeared beside her. Ryan's pulse quickened. He leaned forward, trying to make out the man's face. The hood shadowed his features, but Ryan caught a glimpse of a strong jaw, a thick beard flecked with gray. The man whispered something to Margaret, and she nodded like a scolded child. Shadow growled deep, a sound Ryan had only heard in the presence of true danger. The man's head turned. His eyes met Ryan's across the street. This time there was no doubt. He knew. Ryan's hand went instinctively to the dash for his radio, but the porch light clicked off. Darkness swallowed them whole. Back home, Ryan couldn't shake the stare. The way the man's eyes cut through the night like knives. He paced his living room, phone in hand, debating whether to call Harris, to risk sounding paranoid. Shadow followed him, restless, barking once at the window. Ryan pulled the curtain aside. Across the street, Margaret's porch light flicked back on, but the man was gone. Margaret stood alone, her bag clutched to her chest, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. She looked directly at Ryan's house and whispered something he couldn't hear. The next morning, Ryan returned to the clearing in the woods. Shadow led the way, nose to the ground, body rigid with focus. When they reached the stump, Ryan crouched low, scanning. Something was different. The earth he and Shadow had dug through yesterday was smoothed over. Too smooth, too deliberate. Someone had been back. Shadow barked once, then darted toward the tree line. Ryan scrambled after him. The dog stopped at a cluster of pines, pawing at the ground. Ryan dropped beside him, brushing aside needles and dirt. A box, wooden, weather-worn, its edges splintering. He pulled it free, heart pounding. The lid creaked open. Inside were more photographs. Dozens. Faces of children. Some Ryan recognized from the files. Others he didn't. Each one labeled in the same handwriting. Shadow growled, ears back, gaze fixed on the darkness beyond the trees. Ryan looked up, pulse hammering. Someone was out there, watching. Ryan Cooper sat alone in the dim light of the precinct's records room. The wooden box open in front of him. Spread across the scarred table were dozens of photographs. Children's faces, smiling, frozen in time, each marked with a name written in the same faded hand. Eddie Franklin, Susan Carter, Emily Patterson, 30 in total. 30 kids who had vanished, their cases gone cold decades ago. Shadow lay at Ryan's feet, his ears pricked, his gaze fixed not on the door, not on the shadows of the room, but on the photographs themselves, as if he understood the weight of what they represented. Ryan rubbed his forehead, exhaustion pressing him like a vice. He could still hear Margaret Holloway's voice, trembling, almost pleading, "They're still here." But what did she mean? The door creaked open. Officer Dave Milligan leaned against the frame, his usual smirk replaced by unease. "You've been holed up here for hours. Co-op Harris is starting to notice." Ryan glanced up. "Let him." Dave stepped closer, eyeing the spread of photographs. His face paled. "Jesus, where'd all these come from?" Ryan hesitated. "Shadow found them. Out in the woods. Buried." Dave swallowed hard. "These are the missing kids, aren't they? The cold cases." Ryan nodded, jaw tight. Dave shifted, uneasy. "Look, I know you and that dog have good instincts, but this is big. Bigger than you think. You need to take it upstairs, let the state handle it." Ryan shook his head. "The state buried this once already. I'm not handing it over just to see it vanish again." Shadow growled softly, as if agreeing. That night, Ryan carried the box home. He knew it wasn't protocol, but every fiber in his gut told him he couldn't trust anyone else. Not yet. He set the box on his kitchen table, dim lamp casting long shadows over photographs. His daughter padded into the room in her pajamas, hair sticking up from sleep. "Dad, why are you looking at pictures of kids?" Ryan quickly slid the folder closed. "Just work, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about." She studied him with those sharp eyes that reminded him too much of her mother. "You look worried." Ryan forced a smile. "I'm fine. Back to bed, okay?" She nodded reluctantly and shuffled down the hall. Ryan exhaled, leaning back in his chair. Shadow sat beside him, gaze steady, protective. "You know I can't stop now," Ryan whispered. "Not until I know what really happened." The next morning, Ryan decided to confront Margaret again. He parked 2 houses down, watching as she shuffled out her front door, bag slung over her shoulder as always. Shadow stiffened immediately, a low growl vibrating in his chest. Ryan stepped out of the cruiser. "Mrs. Holloway." She froze, turning slowly. Her pale eyes met his, and for a moment, something like recognition, or maybe resignation, flickered across her face. "You shouldn't keep those," she said quietly. "Those kids deserve answers." Ryan shot back. "Their families deserve the truth." Her grip tightened on the bag. "The truth will only hurt them. Or maybe it'll finally set them free," Ryan countered. For a long moment, she just stared at him. Then, in a voice that cracked under the weight of decades, she whispered, "It wasn't me, but I was the only one who cared enough to keep track. The only one who remembered." Ryan's breath caught. "Then who was it?" Her lips trembled. "He's still here." Shadow barked once, loud and sharp, startling her into silence. That afternoon, Ryan returned to the clearing in the woods. He needed more than photographs, more than Margaret's cryptic whispers. He needed something concrete. Shadow pulled him deeper this time, nose pressed the ground, body taut with focus. They wound through narrow trails, past decaying fences, until they reached the remains of an old cabin. Its roof sagged inward, walls choked with vines. Shadow circled the foundation, barking furiously. He pawed at the dirt near the collapsed doorway, digging hard, dirt spraying behind him. Ryan dropped beside him, clearing the soil. His fingers struck wood. Another box, smaller, rotted, its lid warped. He pried it open. Inside were belongings, tiny ones. A girl's hair ribbon, still pink despite the years. A cracked plastic toy car. A set of keys with a church insignia. Ryan's throat tightened. These weren't random trinkets. These were keepsakes, pieces of lives cut short. Shadow whined, nudging Ryan's arm, then snapping his head toward the woods beyond the cabin. His bark rang out, echoing through the trees. Ryan froze, scanning the shadows. Someone was watching. He could feel it. Back at the station, Ryan laid the new box beside the first. His desk looked like an altar to ghosts. He flipped through case files again, matching names, dates, faces. The pattern was undeniable. Every missing child had some connection to St. Mary's Orphanage. Either they'd lived there, been fostered through it, or volunteered around it. The orphanage hadn't just been a place of shelter. It had been a hunting ground. Ryan's stomach churned. Shadow growled under the desk, ears flicking toward the door just before it opened. Lieutenant Harris stepped inside. His eyes swept the photographs, the artifacts, the boxes. His face hardened. "Cooper, my office. Now." Inside, Harris shut the door with more force than necessary. "You've gone too far," Harris said, his voice low, sharp. "You're digging into cases that were closed decades ago. You've got no jurisdiction to reopen them." "With all due respect, sir," Ryan shot back, "someone needed to. These kids didn't just disappear. They were taken, and the proof is right here." Harris's jaw tightened. "You're chasing shadows." Ryan glanced down at the dog beside him. "Maybe, but shadows don't lie." For a moment, silence filled the office. Then Harris leaned in close, voice like gravel. "Drop it, Cooper. That's an order." Shadow barked once, loud, defiant. Ryan met Harris's stare, his chest tight. He knew in that moment he wasn't just up against an old crime. He was up against something the town itself wanted buried. That night, Ryan couldn't sit still. He drove again to Margaret Street. He told himself it was just to watch, just to keep track. But when he parked under the dim street lamp, his heart nearly stopped. Margaret was on her porch again, clutching her bag. But she wasn't alone. The hooded man stood beside her, taller, stronger, his presence radiating menace. He bent, whispered something in her ear. She nodded, almost childlike, her eyes glistening with fear. Ryan's pulse hammered. Shadow barked, claws scraping at the window. The man's head lifted. His eyes locked on Ryan's cruiser. And then, slow and deliberate, he smiled. Ryan's chest tightened. Whoever he wasn't afraid of being seen. He wanted Ryan to know. The porch light flicked off. Darkness swallowed them both. Ryan sat frozen. Shadow's growl vibrating like thunder in the confined space of the car. The photographs. The keepsakes. The whispers of the orphanage. It was all connected. And now, the man in the hood knew Ryan was getting close. The woods had never felt this quiet. Ryan Cooper moved carefully, flashlight beams slicing through the dense pines. Shadow padded ahead, nose low, tail stiff, body coiled like a spring. Every few steps, the German shepherd froze, ears pricked, head snapping toward a sound too faint for Ryan to hear. Ryan's heart pounded. He knew they were close to something Margaret Holloway had been hiding for decades. Something the hooded man didn't want uncovered. Easy, boy, Ryan whispered, tightening his grip on the leash. Show me. Shadow barked once, sharp, then lunged forward, dragging Ryan down a narrow trail that disappeared into overgrowth. They broke through a thicket and into a clearing Ryan hadn't seen since he was a teenager. The old cabin stood crooked in the middle, its roof sagging, walls rotted, windows dark. It had the feel of a place abandoned by everyone but remembered by everything. Moss crawling up the logs, ivy choking the stone chimney, boards warping like ribs. Shadow growled low, circling the foundation, his paws scraped against the dirt at the corner, claws striking wood. Ryan knelt, brushing aside leaves. The outline of a hatch revealed itself, half buried, padlocked but rusted with time. Ryan's chest tightened. A cellar. Shadow barked furiously, nose pressed a crack, tail whipping like a metronome of urgency. All right, boy, Ryan muttered, forcing his hand steady. He yanked the lock hard. It snapped off with a brittle crack. The hatch creaked open, coughing dust into the air. The smell hit him first. Damp, earthy, and something older, heavier, like secrets left too long in the dark. He flicked on his flashlight and peered down the wooden steps. Stay close, he whispered. Shadow bounded forward without hesitation. The cellar was colder than the air above. Ryan's breath fogged as his boots creaked against the stairs. His beam swept across stone walls, shelves stacked with dusty jars, broken crates. And then he froze. Against the far wall hung photographs, dozens of them, pin-taped, some curling at the edges with age. The same faces from the boxes, the same children, their smiles now haunting under the harsh light. Beneath the photographs sat belongings, shoes lined in rows, toys stacked in corners. A tiny stuffed bear with one eye missing. Shadow growled for bristling. Ryan's stomach twisted. This wasn't just a hiding place. It was a shrine, a catalog of the lost. Movement stirred in the shadows. Don't! Ryan spun, flashlight beam snapping to the corner. Margaret Holloway stood there, her cardigan draped like a shroud, her bag clutched against her chest. Shadow barked, teeth bared. Margaret lifted a trembling hand. Please, don't think it was me. Ryan steadied his breath. Then tell me who, Margaret. Tell me why you kept this. Her eyes filled with tears. Because no one else would. Because they closed the orphanage, buried the truth, and left them forgotten. I couldn't let that happen. Her voice cracked. I wasn't their captor. I was their witness. Ryan's pulse hammered. Then who was? Margaret's gaze dropped. He was one of them. A caretaker. A man the church trusted. He said he was helping. But he was taking them. And when I tried to speak, they told me to be quiet. Said I was confused, hysterical. Her grip on the bag tightened. So I kept the records myself. Every name. Every face. Because if no one else remembered, I would. Ryan's throat tightened. The woman wasn't a predator. She was a keeper of ghosts. A sound broke the moment. A creak above, heavy boots on rotting wood. Margaret's face went white. He's here, she whispered. Shadow snarled, body lowering, teeth flashing. Ryan swung his flashlight upward just as the hatch slammed shut. Darkness crashed over them, heavy and suffocating. "Stay behind me," Ryan ordered, though his hands shook. A voice echoed from above, deep and taunting. "You should have listened, Cooper. Some things were meant to stay buried." The hooded man. The cellar shuddered as something heavy dragged across the hatch, locking them in. Margaret clutched Ryan's arm, trembling. "He knows you're close," she whispered. "He won't stop now." Ryan's jaw clenched. "Neither will I." Shadow barked furiously, circling the cellar, nose snapping toward the far corner. He pawed hard at a section of wall, claws striking hollow wood. Ryan rushed to his side, pressing his ear against the boards. A draft seeped through. An exit. "Good boy," Ryan muttered, prying at the wood with his hands until a panel splintered free. Behind it lay a narrow tunnel, half collapsed, roots dangling like fingers. Shadow squeezed through first, barking, urging them on. Ryan shoved Margaret behind him, flashlight beam bobbing in the cramped dark. The tunnel twisted and groaned, but eventually spat them out into the trees. Cool night air slammed into Ryan's lungs. He sucked it in like salvation. Shadow barked once, ears locked on the cabin. The man stood on the porch, hood down now. His face was hard, beard streaked with gray, eyes glinting with fury. He raised a shotgun. Ryan dropped to a knee, pulling Margaret down. "Stay low." Shadow lunged forward, barking like thunder, zigzagging through the brush. The shotgun roared, pellets tearing bark off trees. "Shadow!" Ryan shouted, but the dog didn't stop. He bounded onto the porch, teeth bared, snapping at the man's arm. The shotgun clattered to the ground. Ryan charged, tackling the man hard, both of them crashing through the rotted porch boards. They landed in the dirt, fists flying, breath ragged. Shadow snarled, circling, snapping at the man every time he tried to crawl free. Ryan pinned him, ripping the hood fully back. The face stared up at him, one he recognized from old case files, old church bulletins. A caretaker from St. Mary's, the predator who had hidden in plain sight for decades. By the time backup arrived, called him by Ryan's frantic radio, the man was cuffed, bleeding, glaring hatred through swollen eyes. Margaret stood off to the side, clutching her bag, tears streaking her face. "You'll finally see them remembered," she whispered. Ryan nodded, chest heaving. He looked down at Shadow, who sat proudly by his side, chest rising, amber eyes locked on the arrested man. "You did it, boy," Ryan said softly, scratching behind his ears. "You brought them home." The next day, the precinct was buzzing. News vans lined the street. Reporters shouted questions. Families of the missing trickled in, faces etched with decades of pain, and the fragile hope of answers at last. Ryan stood in the middle of it all, exhausted but unbroken. Shadow pressed steady against his leg. Margaret was taken for questioning. She might face charges for withholding evidence, for carrying secrets too long. But Ryan knew her story wasn't one of guilt. It was one of survival, hers and the children's memories. And as for Shadow, his bark had carried the truth when no one else dared. As night fell, Ryan sat on his porch, beer in hand. Shadow stretched at his feet. The town was quieter now, but not silent. Somewhere bells rang faintly. Families gathering, names being spoken aloud for the first time in years. Shadow lifted his head, ears twitching at the sound. Ryan scratched his fur, whispering, "You gave them back their voices, didn't you?" The dog thumped his tail once, slow and certain. And that's how it ended. Not with the darkness winning, but with the dog's bark tearing through it, refusing to let the world forget. Sparkles, thank you for following this story. What would you have done if Shadow hadn't barked that first time, walked away like everyone else, or trusted the instinct of a dog? Sparkles,